Um, what a perfect sort of Mediterranean weather maybe to be thinking about ancient Greek philosophy. So my name is Gareth Sturdy. I'm the chair for this evening, and with me, as always, is David Perks, former head teacher, who is guiding us through Plato's dialogues. Hello, David.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good.
Excellent.
Looking forward to this one.
Good. Well, look, I'm going to bring you back in a minute, Dave, but I thought we'd just remind everybody sort of the ground we've covered since we started this group. So here we are in the summer, but it was actually last December, in the depths of winter, that we began looking at the first dialogue, Euthyphro, which is this story of Socrates encountering someone outside the courthouse just before he's about to go on trial for corrupting the minds of the youth of Athens. And whilst we found that in that dialogue it was about holiness, really, what is holiness? Actually, what we were really looking at is what is Socrates doing, and what's his Socratic method, and why did it get him into so much trouble? And then in January, in our second session, we looked at two dialogues: the Apology, which was Socrates' kind of oration, if you like, his defense at his trial, and the Crito, which is one of Socrates' friends. Crito visits him in prison after he's been convicted and sentenced to death, and tries to persuade him to escape. And Socrates comes up with this wonderful line that the unexamined life is not worth living, which is a key quote, obviously, from Socrates. So then last March, we looked at the Meno, which is all about virtue and can it be taught? And we also looked at the Phaedo, which is kind of about the immortality of the soul. But actually, we were really focusing then on a real important theory of Plato's through the mouth of Socrates, which is the theory of the forms, which I'm sure we'll probably mention again several times in our discussion this evening. So here we are, session 4, the Theaetetus. That's, believe how we pronounce this rather complicated named dialogue. And of course, you will have encountered the word knowledge in the Theaetetus lots and lots of times. What is knowledge is going to be our theme for this evening. So, Dave, over to you. I don't know if you wanted to sort of give us an overview of Theaetetus, or any comment on any of the other dialogues and how they might feed into this. Where do we start from?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to do is kind of connect it up a little bit. So, you as you said in the Meno, we started to look at what knowledge is, and how can you teach it? If you don't know it, how can you teach it? Which is very apt if you're a teacher. There you go. And so this one is really saying, well, okay, let's properly look at knowledge, which, if you're a philosopher, is epistemology, the study of what we know and how we know it. And I think you're pretty much right in saying this is the first time this was looked at systematically in all of Western thought. So it's a big one. It's it's the beginning of that whole endeavor. And as usual with Plato, you're left not quite sure whether you've got it yet at the end. So the Socratic method, aporia, are we there, are we not? I'll come back to that in a minute. But I also wanted to say that what we're doing then is next, after this discussion, what I want to do is look at the Republic, which is the big one, the one most people at least have heard of Plato's dialogues, Socratic dialogues. And there's a big connection between this and that. They're all really connected with the Republic, but the ideas that we have from Theaetetus, about what knowledge is, are then recapitulated in the Republic. And again, as Gareth mentioned, the idea of the forms becomes really, really significant again in the Republic. But the weird thing about this dialogue, it's not mentioned, not once. So the forms aren't mentioned as the way of understanding knowledge. And therefore, I'm kind of sort of asking the question, is this dialogue really knocking on the door saying that we need the forms to get anywhere? And I think that's worth keeping with you as we go through it. And if you're not sure what we mean by the forms and all of that, then throw that into this discussion by all means, and we'll try and sort of push it along. But I think that's a big thing, and it's not me saying that. This is a genuine philosophical debate that's had now, not just in the past, but now. Did Plato really mean to say that the forms are the way forward? Or, as some philosophers would say, that maybe he rejected them and didn't believe in them anymore, or he had another reason for not taking that further forward. So, and who am I to say I know the answer to that? I don't, but at least we can at least see where we get to with it. And then there's a couple of other things, broad sweep things that are worth keeping in mind, because it's come up before several times. It's all right saying about Plato and what he says about philosophy and how we understand things, but doesn't the scientific method just sweep all that away? Haven't we got past all of this? We could be accused of wasting our time looking at Plato because science has gone beyond that. I would sort of like you to draw back a little bit from saying that and think, well, what on earth are we talking about when we say the scientific method? And does this actually engage with that at some level? Obviously, it can't be about science, because science as we know it wasn't in existence. Mathematics was. Maybe there's something there, but I also think that this dialogue strongly relates to the underlying principles of the scientific method, if you can pick it out. So that's one. And then another one, which is even broader than that, is what Plato seems to be arguing is that there are two realms in which we exist. One is the material world, as he would explain it, bodily or the sensual world, and the other is the world of ideas in the mind, or the soul, which is another thing that we've discussed a little bit. And just, does this get us anywhere in sort of navigating that distinction, and is that a right thing to do or not? That's as much for you to say as anybody else. And then, what is a philosopher? I mean, that comes back, you can't avoid it with Socrates, but what is a philosopher, and what's the point of being a philosopher? And I think there's a very strong argument for philosophers in this dialogue that is put forward through Socrates. It's worth engaging with that. Right, so those are biggies. They're the big ones. And then we can have a go at it now, I suppose. I think it's a lovely dialogue, because these things are written in such a way that they're not just philosophical, textbooks or anything like that. It's a story. One thing that struck me right at the beginning is it starts off with Euclid. So I was thinking, is that Euclid? Is that him? It's not. But apparently that was a confusion that lasted hundreds of years, because there was two Euclids, and the later one from Alexandria, who developed a very powerful thesis on mathematics. This one is actually more of a pupil of Socrates, and so we're dealing with that conversation. And he discovers Theaetetus virtually at death's door after he's come back from some military campaign in Corinth, and then recounts this conversation between Theaetetus and Socrates at a much earlier age. And you know, it's again very closely linked to the stories that we've already met, because this is a conversation that Socrates had before he went to the courthouse, apparently. So they're all very closely linked. Okay, so first thing. So
I was just, before you do that, Dave, I was just going to cut in with just a couple of points, if I may, very briefly. First of all, I do hope we get onto the science bit at some point, not least because, of course, you and indeed myself got a background in science teaching. So, and I'm always having a go at people for misunderstanding what science really is. So maybe you know, the discussion might get into some of that. But I just did want to let people know, in case you know this is your first one or what have you. Harley has put in the chat links to all our previous videos, all our previous discussions. But also, most importantly, no such thing as a stupid question. So if you're already sitting there thinking, well, I don't know anything about the forms, you know, I'm not sure about any of this, good, because feel free to just, you know, pick us up on anything and say, hang on a minute, you know, what about this idea that I'm not quite sure of? So do that. And just the final thing, very briefly, I wanted to say was it's the framing of this is quite astonishingly modern, isn't it, for something written just so long ago? Because it's we start off with this conversation between two friends of Socrates, who then refer to this situation of Socrates having a chat with his mate in the gymnasium about the young men of Athens, and then one of them's Theaetetus, and then Socrates remembers this conversation he had with Theaetetus ages ago, and it's I think the first one, maybe the only one, where this is a written account. Normally, the dialogues are sort of, you know, records of a conversation, but this we understand is a sort of written down version of that conversation. So clearly it's a bit of a sort of literary masterpiece as well as a philosophical one. I just thought that was worth putting in there. But anyway, Dave, back to you then. Kick us off into the discussion properly.
So if you've read it, this bit you should remember, because it's right at the beginning and it's fairly easy to get your head around this bit. So Socrates asks Theaetetus, what is knowledge? That small little question. And Theaetetus is not shy and gives him a go at it and says, well, it's like, knowledge of, I can't remember the examples he used now, something like carpentry or whatever. So he gives him a list of different people who have knowledge because they're experts in their field, or whatever it is. And Socrates says, well, hang on a minute. Yeah, but that's just a collection of different kinds of knowledge. It's not what knowledge itself is in general terms. I think it's worth just saying, if we get that from the get-go, because otherwise we're not going to get much further. So, I mean, is there such a thing as knowledge in and of itself that is separated from doing something in reality where you need knowledge of it? I'm just throwing that out there, if anyone wants to respond, comment.
If you do, as Harley's just put in the chat, if you do have something that you want to chip in with, do use the Zoom feature for raising your hand, which it sort of depends which kind of version of Zoom you have. But for the latest version, if you click on the reaction button, it should have a raise hand symbol there. Otherwise, I think it's under the participants tab. But anyway, if you've got something to say, just electronically raise your hand and I should catch that and I'll try and bring you in at a suitable moment.
I shall carry on, but you can interrupt me whenever you like. And we'll see where we get to. So, I mean, the the basic point there is that Socrates just says, well, you've missed the point, Theaetetus. I'm trying to get a much deeper understanding of what we mean by knowledge in general terms. So try again. But before he does the midwifery sort of skit, which where Socrates says, this isn't easy, what I do. It's actually really painful. I'm going to cause you a lot of pain if you go with me in this. But what I am not doing is telling you the answer. I refuse point blank. One, because he says, I don't know. Socratic ignorance is a well-known aspect of how these dialogues work. And secondly, because he says, well, he's trying to bring it out of you, not himself, hence the midwife part. So you've got to give birth to this understanding of knowledge for it to be real. And then we've got to thrash it around a bit, which is a bit peculiar, see if it survives or we throw it away. But he's just a windbag, which is quite funny to me anyway. All right, so and you know, in the past, a couple of people in the audience have rejected the sort of perception of this as being, not very feminist in its way it's put forward. So you might reject that idea on the basis that it's nothing like giving birth. But hey, you know what I'm getting at. And so Socrates says he doesn't deal with women; he deals with men. He produces ideas from men, and that's what he does. So there you go.
Dave, Harley's already teed me up about this one. He wanted to ask you a question about the whole midwife thing. So Harley, jump in now.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, in the previous session, in the previous text we were talking about, one part of that is this debate about whether we learn something or whether we kind of already know it, because we're a reincarnation of a previous person, and we can't learn things. We're just remembering what we already knew. So I'm just curious to know what you think. That seems to have been forgotten a bit in this one. But the midwife, so is the midwife helping you remember or helping you learn or helping you bring something? What's happening there?
Well, look, you're right. So the way that teaching was explained in the Meno is that we don't learn, we recollect what the soul already knew. And the soul knew this until it was born in you, and then it forgot. And then we spend our lives trying to recollect and re-understand what the soul already knew. And the soul in its relationship, if you like, to the absolute perfection, God, whatever, is where our understanding has come from. In other words, it's already in us. And that's a highly Platonic idea, is that ideas are within us. We just don't know them until we remember them. And I think the example was teaching a slave boy to do some maths without teaching him, just getting him to do it. And say it's in us, it's all in us. And in a sense, that's the same thing, I think, in its regard. It's just that what we're dealing with here is a bit beyond, a bit of maths that most of us could do. This is about knowledge of itself that we don't know. So that makes it a bit different. Is that an explanation? Have I solved it? Satisfied your question? I don't think I have particularly, but I get the point that you were driving at.
It goes to the heart of the Socratic method, doesn't it? That's the whole point of what Socrates does, really, is to pose questions to people, and the logic of their answers then ineluctably leads them towards a conclusion that may not have been obvious to anyone at the start. So he's sort of drawing it out in a quite painful way sometimes, like you might draw a baby, into the world through in birth, rather than just a sort of transmission model where you kind of have an idea and you imprint it on someone's mind. And in fact, that is if you've read the Theaetetus, you'll know that that's something that we come back to later. But back to you, Dave.
Yeah, I think that the method is really well explained in that the midwife section, in terms of the way that a lot of people understand it today as well. It's like the constant questioning approach. But I think Harley's right in saying that there's a bit more to this, and that you can't get the whole lot in one go from one dialogue, as the way I'd understand it. And maybe it doesn't all fit together. Well, we have to take that on ourselves, really, I think. But yeah, good question. All right, so where does that leave us? Right, so I'm just going to move it on to the next step. So then Socrates then says, well, okay, fine. So have another go at this, Theaetetus. Take it seriously, have another go at it and see if we can do it. And so there are three then attempts to answer the question, what is knowledge? And the first one is really good response from Theaetetus. It says that knowledge is perception. So that's my first go, because if I understand something, it's because I've seen it, I've experienced it, so I perceive it. So therefore, if I perceive it, I understand it. It's not bad. And then immediately Socrates complicates it in a sense by connecting it to pre-existing philosophical approaches. And it's worth making a couple of points about this, because there's a lot in this. So one is, they are just as they are, they're pre-existing ideas. But the second is that there's a running battle going on between Socrates / Plato and the sophists. And this is a live battle at the time, where they're very strong rivals for the ears of the well-to-do young men of Athens. And it's worth understanding a little bit about what the sophists are. I think we should do this again sometime later on. But basically, they are teaching rhetoric to young, intelligent, well-off men who will go into politics. And they are guaranteeing them, if you go along with the sophist teachings, you will win your arguments, because they can make any argument win. And it's, make the worse argument the better. It's probably a bad paraphrase, but you get the idea. And so therefore, these people are real in society. They're not just, cranks. They're getting paid a lot of money by the well-off in Athenian society to do this job, because they see it as a way up in Athenian society. We talked about Athenian democracy last time a bit, and this is a big thing, because Athenian democracy was kicking off during this period, and to get on and to have power and influence, you needed to be able to speak and win an argument, and that's fundamental to this. So Socrates, or Plato, whichever one you want to take it, would say, I'm not doing that. I'm not just giving you a way of winning your argument, willy-nilly, whatever it is. I'm in search of the truth. That's different. And so there's a massive rivalry between the two. And I'm going to probably say the name wrong, but Protagoras, who's the main villain of the piece in this section, is the lead sophist who was a rival to Socrates. He passed away by this time, but his influence was still there. And he had a very big impact in Athenian society. So there's a grudge match, definitely. Okay, so where does that leave us? So perception. So what Protagoras is sort of the words that are used to say what he meant. His catchphrase, in effect, is man is the measure of everything. There's a bit more to it, but that'll do. So man is the measure. And therefore, what does that mean? And what's it got to do with perception? Therefore, if I see something, it is the way I see it that it is to me. That's the knowledge that I have of it. Whereas if you see something differently, the same object, if you like, and you see it in a different way, then that's true to you, because man is the measure of all things. So that brings in immediately what we would call today relativism, a relativist understanding of how we understand the world. Knowledge becomes relative to the observer. So I could annoy Gareth hugely at this moment and introduce something very modern and scientific, but I won't. But what I will do is say that the example that Socrates uses to draw this out, which he doesn't just attack Protagoras, he tries to explain what he meant, which is, and you, the reader, have to say, well, is he, twisting it to his own favor, or is he really taking it on? He says, well, if I say something's cold, do you feel it cold? Or is it not as cold for you as it is for me? And therefore, what is it? Is it just, whatever I see it, is that the truth? Or is it really cold, objectively, beyond both of us, and we're just both wrong? And that's worth playing with, for sure. So, question, is man the measure of all things? There you go. This is good, designed to annoy Gareth.
Oh, well, I mean, you succeed, Dave. Yeah, I mean, I suppose, an analog of that in the modern period, is very, very contemporary. People talk of my truth, don't they? They sort of say, well, hang on, that's, what you think about the world, that's not my truth. My truth is this. And they don't just mean that's my opinion. They mean that's the way the world is for me. So I think it's, regardless of what I think of it, it's a very contemporary, very fashionable way of understanding the world. I wonder if anyone else has got anything to contribute to this. Do you think that's a valid way of approaching the world, or, like Dave, I suspect, do you think Socrates is absolutely right to kind of go headlong attacking this? If you've got anything that you'd like to say, raise your hand. I think people can turn on their cameras if you do want to make a contribution, so we can see you when you make your point.
I mean, I'll prod at it a bit more just to see if it.
Yeah. See, it's
like, because I've no idea where all of you come from philosophically, politically, or anything. We do this without any sort of prejudice whatsoever. But I used to be, fervently left wing, and believed that there was a right way that history should work itself out. And one of the enemies of that is postmodernism, which would say that no, you're just wrong, because the way that you see things is just a story that you hold to, you believe it. But there are other ways. And that's a very loose sort of explanation, to say the least. But postmodernism is real and has had a massive impact, especially as the left disintegrated. Postmodernism became very influential philosophically, culturally, and so on. And so, we now might call it intersectionality, where everybody from every different perspective of their own identity, or the identity they associate with, thinks they have a truth. And that truth is not just for them, but maybe for a group or whatever. And that we're fighting these things out. And I don't think anybody can be unaware of that. That is where we're at. So there is no single truth at all as it stands at the moment. So, you know, on that score, Protagoras was bang on the nail quite a long time before all this, or not.
Well, I'm going to come back in, and I'm also going to ask Harley as well, because I think Harley's got a question about this, and perhaps you can sort of take both points together, Dave, possibly. But I mean, there seems to be two aspects to this. One is there such a thing as an absolute truth? You know, something that's going to be true for everybody, no matter what their own opinion might be. And I guess I'm in that camp. You know, that we have to have a notion that the truth is out there, whether we know what it is or not. Because I think things tend to fall apart without that. But is it not the case that a single individual can only get to the world through their own perceptions and their own understanding of the world, and they can't proceed on the basis that everything's a lie? I mean, even when Descartes says, "Oh, I doubt everything," I mean, you don't really doubt when you get up out of bed and go to work and everything. You know, you sort of accept the world to a certain extent at face value. Everybody has to do that, don't they? You know, everybody to a certain extent has to be the measure of all things. Otherwise, well, you can't really take a part in the world. You can't play a part in the world. That would be my challenge to it. But Harley, what did you want to pitch in as well?
Well, when I was reading the text, I mean, there's loads in this that is still really clearly relevant today. But there was, I remember thinking that, you know, this whole perception equals knowledge debate, which takes up quite a lot of the book, felt a bit arcane. And I was struggling to you know, I mean, I don't think I've ever met anybody who claims that what they see is the truth, or that what they hear is knowledge. But so I was thinking, you know, this feels like a bit of a historical red herring. What builds out of the discussion is more interesting than that particular aspect. But the way you just described it to now seems to be much more connected to the modern, you know, idea of relativism and, you know, my truth and so on. So maybe I was just missing that. I'm just curious. I'm just wary of us sort of projecting our current way of seeing these things back onto something which might have just been an obscure ancient Greek debate, which was, you know, it had its time and is no relevance to us now. Or maybe Protagoras really was a prototypical Meghan Markle. I just can't quite work out where it stands, but I'd be interested to hear a bit more about that.
Okay, I mean, if anyone feels that they can chip in, please do, because I think there's loads you can get out of this. I've been a bit facetious by going into the present and not dealing with it as it's presented. So, which is partly what Harley's just said, but I also think that if you follow through, the trouble is it's quite tough to read, right? There's a lot in it. But if you follow through the objections to perception as knowledge, there's a lot in it. There's a lot going on. So, I mean, I'm just going to flick through a few bits and see if anything registers, right, with anybody. And sort of the critique rather than the explanation, because he does a really good job of defending Protagoras from his own point of view. But I'm going to go for the critique because I think it's a bit more lively, right? So, so the flux theorists, right? I'm prodding Gareth again here, right? So, like, because it wasn't just Protagoras; it was Heraclitus, who's a pre-Socratic philosopher, who more or less said and was attributed to have said that everything is in flux, everything, and you know, the famous image is of him standing in front of a river and saying you can never get in the same river twice because it's moved, it's all change. And he said the whole universe was like this, everything, right? And if that's the case, well, how does that link to the relativism thing? Well, if my perception of something is what it is, but my perception is always going to be different, it's never going to stay the same. So it's always changing. So and if yours is, so you look at something and look at the color of it. I think another example is the color white. What is the color white? Well, white isn't a color because when we see it, it's not pure white. It's in shadows. It's got some kind of tint on it and what have you. And that changes all day long. The sun goes up and down and everything changes. So that's just one way of looking at it, which would mean you could never know what it is. So if everything is in flux, there's no possibility of knowing what something is. And that's pretty much Socrates' rejection of it, which is really important because the idea is that things change, and there's lots of ways of saying it. I think Socrates does a great job of doing this, coming into being. It's not what it is, it's moving, it's changing. It's fundamental to different philosophical approaches later on, not least those that lead to things like Hegel. I'm not in any way diving into Hegel now, so don't worry about that, but I'm just saying that that's a truth, that these ideas have not disappeared. However, in these terms that set out in Socrates' debate about how do we know things, I think he's onto something. If we can't grab hold of anything, we can't know anything. And I think Gareth's already hinted at that a bit as well. And then he insults him and says, well, if man is the measure of everything, why can't a pig be? Which is one of my favourite bits. Is like, you just take it to the extreme. And then, but what about then, who's the wisest of us all? No one. We're all as wise as one another because no one can have a better view. We all see the truth. So what about your doctor? Can your doctor tell you anything different than you about your health? So no, because we just have a perception of it. And he does a thing about the future as well. In the future, can you tell what's going to happen in the future? Well, obviously not. So I think I'm going to get well. My doctor says I'm going to die. They can't both be right. So we're lost. We've lost something if we stick to this approach, because we can't grasp knowledge. So I think
I'm going to hold you there because Christopher has got a great question that sort of speaks to this really, because Christopher, Christopher's saying he can't unmute or turn the camera on at the moment, but I'll ask the question for him. He's basically saying, was Socrates opposed to this and the kind of sophist approach just because he thought it was sloppy thinking, poor thinking, or more pragmatically because he saw these ideas as dangerous to the Athenian state, Dave? And it seems to be, and that's why I'm coming in now, because from what you're saying, you could say, well, if we persist with this idea, the whole state might come down, the whole society might fragment. And then thinking about you're linking it with the sort of postmodern turn in contemporary society, you may argue, or at least a lot of people do, that in embracing that kind of approach, lots of parts of our society do feel like they're coming apart in one way or another. So is that it? Is it dangerous, or is it just it's not very good thinking? What's Socrates opposed to here?
Well, I think there's quite a lot in what you just said. I think if you remember, one of the other ways we've looked at this is that Socrates is always asking what is virtue, and how do we understand what it is to live a good life is the underlying concept that goes with us wherever we go with Socrates. So definitely, you know, if the good men of Athens are all just sophists, we can't believe a word they say. You know, they're all out for one thing, that's themselves. That's, you know, you can run a society like that, but it's dangerous. It is dangerous. So I think he's calling them to account for sure. And I think the Republic is the best way to get your head around that one. The Republic is about the virtue of justice. You know, what is a just society, or how is it to act in a just way? And so that's where we're going with it. You know, in the discussions we're having. So I think you're onto something, definitely. Yeah. But in terms of a kind of, you know, much more mundane, how do we know what we know? You can't say what you know, right? We're stuck. And what he's saying is, come on, let's get out of this trap. Otherwise, we're stuck with stuff that one day looks like this, the other day looks like that. We don't know what we're talking about. Or we can't judge someone against a standard of truth, of knowledge, and hold them to account, because, you know, we don't know if they're going to just bamboozle us with a great argument.
I want to come back on so much of this, but Harley wants to come in, so I'm going to give way.
Yeah, well, sort of building on Christopher's question about, you know, why was Socrates doing what he was doing, criticizing the sophists? Well, I mean, it's also, he talks about at some point about God, and, you know, I think the only escape route from the fight against evil is assimilation to God, as in singular. So, you know, the truth that he sees the sophists as being the people who want to win the argument, whereas Socrates is saying it's more important to have the right argument and to get to the truth and to head in the direction of God, singular. Godlessness is the only alternative, I think he says. So I'm a bit confused about all that, because I thought God came later, and at that time, you know, they had gods, and I think even in the text they mention, he talks about some gods in the plural as historical figures. So I'm just, if the sort of direction to heading for truth, good, God, sort of in towards that single higher thing is what's driving Socrates, was that a complete was that just not, you know, something that was expected in ancient Greece, or did people not have the effing clue what he was talking about? Because I thought that came after Plato, as a, you know, coming from Plato.
I think that's really interesting. So assimilation to God is the point. So what we aim to do is to reach a pure understanding, an absolute knowledge of everything. But if you then link it back to the thing you mentioned earlier about the soul, and you know, we're trying to recollect what the soul already knew. It's the same thing, right? It's that pure state of understanding and knowledge that already existed before we were born, but we've forgotten it through our, you know, physical life, being born and having to start all over again. And we're trying to recollect everything, understand it, and reach it. And you can ask the question, well, is this saying that we're really arguing that we're trying to understand the forms? This is where you can then say that that's possibly what he's aiming at, without saying it. Now, why he doesn't say it, you can argue about, but by saying that, he's saying that there is a standard, there is a truth that we can aim at, but we can't get at it through our bodily life and our senses. We can only approximately reach it. And therefore, the assimilation is the aim, the goal is to get as close as we can to that pure understanding. And I think there's another bit of it, which I think you mentioned, which I've It's just slipped my mind now. But that to me is the underlying sort of aspect of this that links possibly to the forms which will come out again through the Republic.
I mean, I don't want to sort of spoil the later discussion, but we are heading, if you've read it, you'll be familiar. We're heading towards this idea of logos, like a sort of rational principle, and the context is that Plato is writing at exactly that point where Greek society is going from what tends to be called the mythos, the Greeks of that, the gods of that Greek pantheon, to logos, the rational principle. So I think we're seeing kind of a sort of inspection trench in right into how these ideas are shifting and changing. But also another bit of context to mention, of course, after the Greeks, if you turn to the New Testament, and John's Gospel is explicitly identifying then the logos with God, and the word made flesh and all this, that's the Greek word for word in the New Testament is logos. So we're sort of headed in that direction, but it is over a great deal of time and a lot of working it all out. Sorry, Dave, that's kind of cut right across, but
you reminded me exactly what it was I missed, right? Because I think the point is, what is this God that Harvey mentioned? Surely that's later on. Is very confusing because if you know your Homer a bit, then you'll know there's a whole bunch of these gods, and they're mostly unruly and do ridiculous things, and they're not like our God at all. Well, I say our God, the God that we assume that we're talking about. That's to be developed very clearly, but you can see that the impetus for that is literally being worked out. I think you're right, Gareth, in that. Although I would not say that they would at all attribute their God to the Christian God, the monarch that we do. That's a battle that has to be fought.
Yeah.
But it's there. It's an underlying thing. So there's an absolute that they're aiming at. And if we ever do this, if we go to Aristotle, we have to have that battle out, because Aristotle argues very clearly on that one, but that's for another time. Okay, so I think, and let's come back to anything or tackle any part of this. There's a couple more of these that are worth mentioning. These critiques of perception. So anyone who studied a foreign language, there's one. If you hear a foreign language, you perceive it, but you don't understand it. Easy one, right? Memory is not perception because we don't see it. It's in our memory. So if we're not seeing it, it can't be knowledge. So memory can't be knowledge. Another one. He's got loads of them. You cover one eye. What are you looking at with the other eye? That can't be right. And then the adverbial one, for any primary school teachers like adverbs, right? So like seeing dimly, well, is that knowledge? So perception is fraught with issues. So I move on, right? So okay, and then we're now heading towards the second attempt. But before that, the digression that Harley mentioned, the assimilation to God argument comes in, which is a really powerful piece about what are we doing as a philosopher, and the defense of a philosopher, the defense of being a philosopher against a rhetorician is in there as well. But there's also something that I'm just literally throwing this out, but I think it's worth saying. So in the digression, he also says that evil cannot perish. There must always be something opposed to good. So there's loads of stuff going on. However, Move on. Knowledge, right? So the second attempt by Theaetetus to define knowledge is really powerful. So he says knowledge is true belief, right? So, and this is really, really important distinction. And to me, there's one thing you can get from this is still live. This isn't over, this discussion. So that means then what he's now saying is if I believe something and it's true, that's knowledge. Okay. And you might not get this if you've not dealt with this kind of discussion before. So it's worth thinking, what do we mean belief? Why is that separate from knowledge? And so I was in a discussion, sort of undergraduate level discussion about this, and then the prof was saying, well, you know, this is goes back to what you said, Gareth, about how do we survive? You can only survive if you believe a lot of things. You don't know them, you believe them. And this is the distinction. So when I go outside the door, I believe that the pavement's still there, and that I'm going to walk down the road and the bus stop will still be there. I don't know it, I believe it. Or that, you know, the air hasn't all disappeared off the planet. I believe that I'm still going to be able to breathe, etc., etc. And if you start thinking like that, and thinking about the beliefs that you hold, that you think you know they're true, but you don't know they are. You don't really know. You can get a bit confused about how we manage to survive.
Can I come in?
Yeah, of course.
Not a facetious question, because I think it does take us to this thing that's hanging around in the background between being and becoming, and, you know, which is what Socrates is trying to sort out. Point taken, but do you believe or do you know that you exist?
Exist.
Yeah.
I mean, so earlier on, I can't remember where it is, it's a shame. He does a thing earlier on about perception where he says, okay, if it's perception, prove to me that you're not dreaming. Okay. How do you prove you're not dreaming if it's perception? And it's Protagoras' answer to that he puts forward is that, well, when you're asleep, you're a different person. So your perception is real when you're asleep. Your dream is real. And when you're awake, your perception is yours and you're not the same person. That perception is real. And he gets out of it like that. So I'm not going to do any more than that. So, but, you know, the point is, can you prove you're not dreaming? Right? Real dreaming, same sort of thing. You can't. You cannot do it. There's no way of doing it. That's an open challenge. Anyone who wants to prove me wrong is welcome. And it's a bizarre thing that we, you know, for God knows how long we've been trying to think about what we know, but we're limited in what we can say. So the matrix, which is now part of philosophy in university, because it expresses the same thing that philosophers have expressed, but in a way that everyone's going to remember. You know, the problem's real. We don't know the answer. Send answers on a postcard, whatever. You know, you tell me how to prove that we're not a figment of each other's imagination, and we'll publish.
My translation had a good long section, sort of in the translation of this word that is translated either judgment or belief, you know, and saying how those two words can be applied. You know, often you'll find it belief in translations, often you'll find it judgment. And it sort of made the point, which I quite liked, that they were using judgment because they felt it was an act, whereas a belief is a sort of state that you might be in, whereas a judgment is something, you know, that you do. And I thought that was quite helpful in trying to understand this section. But I mean, I have to say, I don't know about anybody else, I found the bit, a quite long section on knowledge as true judgment, really difficult to follow. That's the first time I've kind of read Plato and thought, oh man, I don't think I can do this. You know, I don't think my brain's up to it. You push on through and it's okay at the end, but that's just a little observation of mine.
again, it's worth looking at the ways in which this is questioned. Okay, leave the judgment out for the moment, though. Just stick with true belief, because I think that comes in at the end as a qualification that is needed, and then you have to explain what you mean by it. But so on the true belief, this brings in two brilliant ideas which show you that he's now thinking about how do we know, not just what do we know, but how do we know. So he starts bringing a mental model, if you like. Okay, what is it that we do when we think about something? And the block of wax, which I think is great, absolutely brilliant, is brought in, and the aviary, which is even more bonkers, right? But so perceptions are taken into memory and imprinted on the block of wax, your memory, right? And that can be done really perfectly or badly, but it's still done. And that's how you know you've perceived or experienced something. You remember it. And so what he's saying is, does memory get us out of this problem? Can you therefore sort of understand what knowledge is by understanding that? And he does it backwards. This is the crux. So he does it by saying, can you have a false belief? And if you can have a false belief, then we might know what belief is, right? We might finally know what knowledge is. And so he then goes through the different ways in which false belief can be created. And so it's obviously this is his version of it. So the block of wax. So the first one he comes up with is misidentification, which is the nub of the whole thing. Can two things be confused? Well, if you perceive them and they're in memory and they're different, you can't. You just can't confuse them because they're different and you know them because you perceive them. So the block of wax fails. It doesn't get you out of the trap, right? What if you have a bad memory? But it's still a memory. It's still our belief that you've perceived something and it's not the same as something else. So you can't, it doesn't work, right? So you're not going to succeed in that regard. And then he does another one, which is believing what is not, right? So you believe something and then you believe what is not, and they confuse the two. But what is not is nothing, because it's not. So you can't believe in nothing because it isn't there. So that's not a possible way out of it. And then he does the one called allodoxia, which is a Greek word that I have no idea but how to translate it. But basically saying you inadvertently mix things up because, if we're conscious of what we're doing, that's not possible. That isn't possible either. So if we're thinking about it, we can't do that. And then he does the aviary, and the aviary's got a brilliant example in it, which is worth a couple of minutes. So the aviary works by saying that beliefs are these birds flying around in the aviary. They're all going crazy. Every time you get a belief about something, you chuck it in the aviary and forget about it, but it's still in there, and all you got to do is find it when you need it. But you put your hand in and you pull out the wrong bird, right? But then you look at it and you know it's the wrong bird. So that doesn't work either because you've misidentified it. See, that doesn't get you out of the problem, right? So you can't say that the aviary model solves the problem. And then Theaetetus says, well, what if we have ignorance flying around in the aviary? So you pull out an ignorant answer, a non-answer, but then you'd know it's a non-answer and then you throw it away as well. Doesn't work. And so he's getting to a point where you just can't have a false belief, okay? Right, so the example I was going to do, and then I'll shush for a minute, is 5 plus 7 equals 11. Is it possible to do that? And he goes through this and said, 11 and 12, they're obviously numbers, they're flying around in the aviary. You could try and pull 11 out and say that's right, But if you know 5 plus 7, you immediately know that that's wrong. So you can't do that one. So it's not possible, if you understand 5 plus 7, to say it's 11. Right? Now, you may say, well, children are stupid. They can do that. But why and how is not explained by any of these explanations. So there is no such thing as false knowledge, false belief, sorry. And therefore, we don't know what belief is. That's what that section's about. Okay.
I just stuck it in the chat. I'm wondering if anyone agrees with me. I do try to kind of give Socrates the benefit of the doubt, but sometimes he annoys the hell out of me. Like I found those arguments really difficult to follow. At each step, I felt that I was kind of quite ironically misunderstanding something in a big way, because I just thought, but you clearly can have false beliefs about things. I must be misunderstanding my interpretation of false belief and his. Just found the whole thing. Yeah, so Christopher's come back as well, said he read it a couple of times and still not sure I get it. I went through it 3 times, and after the 3rd time I thought, this is just not for me at this moment in my life, I think. So I'm having to trust you, which is really, really ironic. But this for me was really weak, because I just couldn't follow his argument. I had to kind of take on trust what the commentaries I was reading were telling me, Dave?
Look, I mean, to me, the 5 plus 7 one is the one that you can cling to, right? Can you think that 5 plus 7 equals 11? And under what circumstances can you accept that that's right? In other words, that you've got a false belief. And the only possible way that can be is that you don't know what 5 plus 7 is. So then it's not a belief at all. It's nothing. So if you know what 5 plus 7 is, it cannot be 11. You just can't. And in a way, it's when you think about arithmetic, it's not easy to get your head around this. But when you think about arithmetic, it's like, we know certain things when we've been taught it, like 1 plus 1 is 2. Prove it. Go on, prove it. And the reason I say that is because a couple of gentlemen did try and prove it and used all of logic, Principia Logica, a book that thick, and thought they proved it. No other person on the planet is going to make that effort. In other words, what it is a belief. It's a belief. It happens to be a true belief that we hold to. And you'll say, well, that's cheating, because if you're not a mathematician, you say, well, how do they know then? Well, that's what you should say. And what you come down to is that mathematics, as a study of understanding something, is based on axioms. We have to accept some starting points to get to anything else. And this is done in Socrates when he does the dream and the complexes and simples and Theaetetus' own name, and breaking it down. And that you can get to a single thing, an element. There's nothing you can do with that. You just believe it. Right? Complexes, yeah, you break them down. And I think that's a massively powerful thing. And you getting your head around what that is beyond this, but it's there, in it. And it's like, wow, as far as I'm concerned. However, it's not the answer.
Well, just on that, before we go lunging into Gödel's incompleteness theorem or something, Mark is also saying, yeah, he's got some issues with false understanding. He brings into it the sort of ideology, which I guess is looking towards the bit at the end where the judgments you make have to be according to some kind of principle or organization or what have you, but there's that. I just want to point out that Jill says in the chat that I read this section over and over and was very confused. I never thought I'd get to the end. However, it is becoming less dense as Dave grapples with it. So if nothing else, Dave, you've moved the dial a little bit for Jill here on understanding the false belief. But we've gone past the 7 o'clock mark, so perhaps we ought to
Last bit, yeah.
move on to the next bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so this bit is fantastic, and I want to add a tiny bit after this, which is not in Plato, it's outside of it, but relates to it. So the third and last attempt by Theaetetus to get it right, and I'm probably paraphrasing it, is knowledge is justified true belief. And there's the justification part. And so that's a big sort of a step forward with a small addition. Yeah. So we've got these true beliefs, but we've got no idea why. So we have to justify them now. So if we can justify them and make them an argument for them, then that is knowledge. That's what we're trying to work on. And this is the Socrates' dream section. So I'm doing this relatively quickly. So, and the Socrates' dream section, which is looking at, how do you break things down and therefore explain them? So if you take a syllable, I think he uses SO from Socrates, the first syllable, it's got two letters, S and O. So if you know S and O, do you know so? And so one argument is, yes, you do, because you know the elements of it and you've broken it down. And that's a justification for your belief in it. But the argument against that is saying that so is itself an element and not the same as the two letters. It's itself a belief, if you like, that isn't justified by the two letters. It's not enough. The justification isn't enough. And so then it extends and in effect says, well, you have to then push it further. So what is it that we need to understand this? So to cut a long story short, so he takes Theaetetus and says, yes, you can know the letters, you can know the order of the letters, you can know the syllables that make up the word, and therefore you can know that this Theaetetus is name, but that's not enough. You need to know that this Theaetetus has a snub nose and wonky eyebrows, but so does Socrates. So you need to know that it's not them; they're not the same person, and you need to then have knowledge of Theaetetus, and that's the trap. So the trap is that without knowledge of the context within which the thing that you're looking at exists, you don't know it. But then you need knowledge to know it. That's a loop. And therefore you're trapped. And Socrates does that himself to his own idea, which is the brilliant thing about this, and says, well, it's not good enough. And pretty much that's the end of it. And so the question right at the beginning is this aporia? Are we lost? Do we know nothing? Well, actually, a big argument in philosophy is no, that's not true, because this is Plato's best guess at knowledge, justified true belief. And you can then say, well, where do we go with it? And there's only one place Plato can go with it, and that's the forms. And that the justified true belief in terms of Plato's understanding would be to link it to the forms, and then you've got something, a context within which to understand things. So I think that's it. That's where we are with it. I think it's a brilliant dialogue, but as you know, if you've read this and struggled with it, it stretches you every which way. So that's that.
It's a beautiful place to end up with, isn't it? That I mean, after the 2,500 years in between Plato and ourselves, and all the twists and turns of philosophy, but also you know, the sort of existentialism, we talked about postmodernism and so on before, that to land on this place where knowledge is a really difficult thing to know what it is, but yet here's our sort of best guess that has actually served us well for, you know, a couple of millennia. I mean, it's just it's just a wonderful thing to kind of contemplate. You know, Socrates going, well, I don't think I've even got the answer myself, but this kind of works for a bit, and yeah, we still can't really improve on that. Does anybody want to give us, you know, either any questions or any just observations about reading this? If you read it, you know, how did you find it? Because I certainly found it a real challenge. Leanne in the chat is making the observation that it's just amazing that we're still questioning these things, unable to pin them down. And I think each of us have said that at some point in preparing for this evening. We've all gone, God, this is just like a contemporary debate in so many respects. Yeah, if you want to pop your camera on, we're not quite sure this evening if cameras are working or not. That may have been something that I did before the meeting started. So apologies if your camera isn't working. But anybody want to share anything? It's difficult to know what you're making of this when when it's basically just me, Dave, and Harley. But anyone got anything to contribute? I mean, while I'm waiting, Harley, I know that you were saying earlier, can I pitch in with something? But no, look, Jill has appeared. Jill, let's see if we can unmute you.
She has to do that.
Yeah, can you unmute yourself, Jill? And
I was just going to say that I found this one particularly difficult, having read the others and sort of thought, oh, I think I'm getting there. And then listening to the discussion, I felt, you know, I'd almost got it. But with this one, I just had to keep rereading it, and I got a little bit tied up with all the so and the, you know what I mean? So I did find that very difficult. And whenever they mention maths, it was very hard too. But yes, I just wanted to say that really and say hello to everybody, because it is awkward for you chatting to us all and not knowing whether there's any feedback coming. But so can I go now?
That's a lovely contribution, Jill. I just wanted to hopefully give you some encouragement that the first bit of Plato I ever read was the Republic, and I found that a lot easier than Theaetetus, even though the ideas in it are, you know, really substantial. I just found going through it was just a lot more straightforward. I really loved it. So, you know, do stick with it. Do stick with us for the next one.
Oh,
on the Republic.
I am hanging in there.
It's aporia. That's how he wants you to feel, you know. It's that kind of what's this all about sort of thing. But I mean, just thank you very much for you know, taking part. Wonderful. And unless anybody else wants to say anything to you, yes, you may go if that's anybody else want to either share Jill's appreciation of it, or maybe you found it really easy. Go on, Harley. You found it easy, Harley. I know you did.
Definitely not. And I'm wondering now, after Dave's last contribution, that if I ended up coming to a completely different conclusion about this last section, which really was difficult, I think. But I did like the bit that I was hanging on that I really liked was the wax, that image of the wax as, you know, sort of knowledge being an impression on the mind, which I think is the way I tend to see it. I remember a few years ago seeing an eminent professor of education saying that the key thing about knowledge is that it had to be true. And I remember thinking at the time that's wrong. It has to be. And this text has a really good example of why. Because it talks about, you know, knowing that the sun goes round the earth, which everyone would have treated as knowledge back then, but we know we know now to be incorrect. And science is full of things that, you know, we have, it's an imperfect approximation of what the reality is. We're getting ever closer, hopefully. But we don't, you know, there's all kinds of things in science that might get overturned by future knowledge. So I think that, to me, the more useful way to think of knowledge is that it's, you know, it's about something that has made that impression upon us, that we can recall, we're certain about it, and we can use that. And where it intersects with truth is because if we use that knowledge, and we're not alone in the world, we talk to other people, they say, well, you're wrong, because they've got their perception and their view on the truth, and together that knocking back and forth about what our knowledge is, hopefully collectively gets us to somewhere that actually is closer to the truth.
Oh, I'm tempted to say something now. So what you just said is a way out of this dialectics in the terminology that you should use. I'm not sure it is. However, it's a nice one to have, because it's definitely the case that Socrates uses dialectics. That's his push and shove with whoever he's talking to. So, you know, in effect, the answer is, does he solve it? And the answer is no. But we're getting something out of this. And this is an odd one because, like I said, it's not strictly aporia, because we end up with an answer which is the best answer we're going to get as of Plato, and therefore as of until at least the 19th century, which is quite phenomenal to think about. But there's one thing I wanted to do, which is throw something in for the last 5-10 minutes, which is very, very live and new. And you might recognize a bit of it because of this discussion. So it's something I was involved in about philosophy of religion. And I'm not in any way religious, but I'm just trying to say how the religion is justified. And there's a guy called Alvin Plantinga, who's an American philosopher of religion, who kind of reinvented the whole sort of genre of religious philosophy, because he took on the idea of belief and basically said, can you have a religious belief that is not evidential, that doesn't have evidence, or if in terms of this, that there's no perception of reality that can tell you that God exists or your religion exists or whatever. There's nothing to cling to. And so what he did was he looked at this idea. This is the bit that's interesting, of what he called a properly basic belief. And so what he said was, there are some things that we believe without any real justification, but we believe them. You can ask why or whatever as well. And guess what? 2 + 2 = 4, and so on, is a properly basic belief. You can't explain why. You accept it, and then you can build things on it, right? And so his whole argument relies on the fact that if you can have a religious belief that is properly basic, it can't be disproved, and therefore you can hold it, and therefore it gives you a way of saying that religion is credible. My religious beliefs are reasonable, right? And as a result of that, and which is a very recent argument over the past 10-20 years, there's been a resurgence of interest in the philosophy of religion, because it's very hard to knock down. So if you, on the other hand, take it, what's the evidence for God existing, etc., etc., those arguments are very circumspect, because there's not much evidence. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but you can't point to the evidence in a categoric way and say, look, there's the evidence because of this. You can say, well, you know, the design argument, you know, the universe must have been designed because how could it be like this, right? Whatever. It's not good enough. None of those arguments are good enough. But what Plantinga did was say, well, yeah, but that doesn't matter. Because if you have a properly basic belief, something that cannot be challenged, well, there you go. I can believe in it, right? And that relates very much to a modern view of religion, where we, you know, a lot of people who are religious, I mean, I just think of America, and because he's American, so just think of America, and people, you know, say they're religious, they have a religious experience, they belong to a religious community, but they can't explain it. They just cling to their belief. And you can't take someone's belief away from them. You can't say, well, I don't accept your, you know, religious experience because that's theirs, it's not yours. And so it kind of justified a lot of interest and is very much a live debate now. And so it's kind of weird because it's like saying the opposite of what Plato's done, is saying Plato's justified true belief. This is no justification whatsoever. You can't unpick it. It's a basic belief. Thought I'd throw that in just to.
It's fascinating. It points to how when I read this, it felt just like a kind of walk through, you know, 2000 plus years of philosophy. Every turn you're going, oh, it's a bit of Kant coming up here. Oh, here's Heidegger. You know, here's the postmodernists. When Harley was speaking, I was reminded of, you know, when talking about the wax tablet. I mean, that's what the whole of that Enlightenment, John Locke, the blank slate, all of that is looking back to and trying to then use that as a way of articulating a new kind of philosophy. So, I mean, it's amazing how everything locates back to these dialogues and just how much of philosophy locates to this one particular dialogue. I found it really fascinating. Thank you very much, Dave, for walking this through, especially when I think most of us have just been sitting here kind of agog, kind of going, if I can pitch in, I will. But at the moment, I'm clinging on, as Jill put it. You've got some ideas about how we might sort of further this discussion. Do you want to just say a little bit about that?
Yeah, so look, I think it's hot, it's the summer. I'm not doing another one until term starts again. Sorry, I'm a teacher, so everything's by term. So I think if we aim to kick off again in September, at the moment I'm thinking somewhere around the second week of September, unless anybody screams at me and says that's impossible. I think that's a good one to do because everyone's suddenly all busy again. You know, it's like we're all G'd up. And what I want to do is do the Republic, but in 3 chunks. So it's big. So I don't want to do it all in one go. You know, there's some classic bits of it, which, and if you haven't read it and you don't know it, you'd be surprised about it. So the earliest argument for feminism you've ever read is in there as one thing. It's effectively what is the perfect state, an argument for that. And if you've got any interest in politics, well, that's pretty live discussion now anyway. So, and yet it's also about the individual. So it's about psychology as well. It's about who we are and what we are. And there's some very famous allegories in the middle of it. The most famous one is the cave. I would be very disappointed if I did not give you all the cave and that we can all have a big discussion about it. So I want to break it up into about 3 bits. But the idea is if I say try and read it over the summer, just read it, don't think too hard about it. And then we'll kick off again in September and I'll keep people in touch with what's going on. I also wanted to say that if you want to talk about it as we're leading up to that, I'm going to run a WhatsApp group. I promised this last time and didn't do it really. but I will do it this time. And the way that will work is if you want to be part of that, you email me directly with a mobile number that you are prepared to stick in the WhatsApp group, and I'll send you an invite. And then I can send you notes and whatnot about what we're doing, and then respond to people's questions, queries, and the rest of it. And that can be about anything we've done up to now. I don't mind at all. So it's live, but we haven't really invited people to it much. Like one person in it from this group. That's it really. But I mean the Republic. I mean, I really want to make a big thing out of this, because this is, if there's one thing that you can take away from this discussion group, it's saying that you've read the Republic and discussed it. That stays with you. That one stays with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everybody. I told my boss once, he asked me what's the best book on education he could read, and I said The Republic, and lo and behold, he went away and read it and came back and said, why? And I thought, oh, how long have you got? Anyway, education and all other things besides. Thank you, everybody, so much for turning up. Look out for an email from Dave coming up. And as I say, I encourage you to turn to the WhatsApp group, because if you do have questions, often it's not in the group. It's when you're reading or you go away and you think about what's been said, and then it's only later that you think, oh, hang on a minute, what about this? That's an ideal place. So have a think about that. Email Dave, as he says, if you want to be part of that. Okay. Well, I think we're probably done, unless anyone's got any final points that they want to make. I can see all sorts of messages popping in the chat now. Lots of people, Dave, very grateful for the discussion this evening. If they haven't taken part, it's not because they're not interested, certainly. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you on the other side of the summer. Enjoy the Republic between now and then. Thanks very much.
Thank you.